All right, we are live. Okairi, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we are back for another wonderful episode of Page Chewing. Today we have my co-host P.L. Stuart. Steve may be joining us later, we'll see. And our esteemed guest today is John Jarrold, a literary agent. And we are
Hi there.
delighted to have you with us. Thank you for coming on.
It's an absolute
Yes.
pleasure.
So before we get started, I'd just like to give our guests a chance to kind of introduce themselves, kind of say what they do in the book world, and tell us kind of how you found yourself with us today.
Well, for 15 years, I ran 3 SF and fantasy imprints in London, including Orbit. And then I left publishing because it got very corporate, wearing suits and in meetings all the time. And a couple of years after that, when I was a freelance editor, authors started coming to me and saying, have you thought about being an agent? If so, would you be my agent? That's how the agency started in 2004. I did not intend to be an agent before that. I get around 40 submissions a week. I take on about 2 or 3 authors a year, and that's an average percentage for any agent. First day I worked in publishing, my boss said to me, if you've got any doubts about a book, any doubts at all, say no, because you've got to be jumping up and down. So since 2004, I've run the agency. Obviously, email has made things so much easier, so one doesn't have to work in London anymore. I will get 200 emails a day. If I'm delivering a Word document to a publisher, I can just attach it to an email and send it. Whereas 20 years ago, you'd have had to print it out and post it. So that's made everything a huge amount easier. And I love what I do. I've worked in publishing for 35 years. My father worked in London docks. He did not do that because he loved it. He did it to put bread on your mum. So I was really proud that they both saw publishing work for me before they shuffled off this mortal coil. And yeah, I'm just a very, very lucky boy.
Yes, and you're very, very popular. So before we continue any farther, I want to make sure we make the disclaimer that anyone who engages with this stream, we're very happy that you're here, but we will not be engaging with inquiries during this live stream. If you want to pitch your book to John, you can find his website down below and follow the instructions there. But for this particular live, we're going to focus more on talking about what it is you do for clients and kind of getting the nitty-gritty background into the literary world. So that's just a disclaimer for anyone who is joining us today. But in that vein, as someone who has the history of running 3 imprints and now has your own agency, what exactly does a literary agent do for a client? Because as someone who loves books, I'm kind of ashamed to say I don't exactly know what the job description entails.
One of the lines I use most often is no absolutes. And obviously every author individual, so you deal with it as individuals, as you do as a publisher. It isn't one size fits all. So the basic thing is, if I take an author on, debut novelist, I will edit the book completely, because basically a publisher now wants a book that's almost ready to publish. They will edit it after they buy it, but nonetheless they want it in as pristine a condition as it can be. I will explain to them how publishing works. I will explain how slowly publishing works. I can go through day by day what happens, because basically once you do a deal, it'll probably be a year before that book is published for various reasons. And then, depending on what that individual author wants, I can act as a business manager, I can act as a friend, I can act as somebody who will kick them up the backside and say, get on with it. So it depends, and no 2 days are exactly the same, which is it's a pleasure. Sometimes they will say they've got a problem with the writing, and we talk through what it is, and sometimes I can help with the problem. Sometimes I just say, look, go away for a month, think about something else, and then come back. So, over the years, you just do what the author needs, because it's the author's name on the book, not my name on the book. It's not the publisher's name on the front of the book. It's on the spine of the book. So it's the author who is important.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear that, because it seems like you almost act as a middleman or a support system for an author who's approaching a publishing house, essentially?
I think because I was a publisher for 15 years, the editors I deal with understand that I know how difficult their job is. I sat in that chair for 15 years, so we can talk sensibly. I learned what I also learned what not to do from some rotten agents when I was a publisher. So you take both of those sides on board and try to explain author what a publisher can do and what they can't do. Sometimes an author will have a great idea and say, "Oh, what about this?" And you say, "Right, now I can't ask that because X, Y, Z. However, I could ask this." So it's a learning process for the author as well about how publishing works. And then I can go to the editor and say, "Okay, one of the things we're thinking about is this. Could we have a chat about that? Maybe with you, your sales director, your marketing director, some of whom I've worked with when I was a publisher, the sales and marketing directors in London." So again, we try and do it all looking in the same direction, all trying to do the same thing, which is to publish a book wonderfully well.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, I think, important perspective to keep in mind, is everyone has the same goal here. I think we often tend to look at publishing as almost like a war zone. It's kind of the view some people have of
A
it.
publisher doesn't take on a book because they want it to fail.
Right. Exactly. So do you find then that, not that it's a necessity to be a literary agent to have been in publishing before, but do you find that gives you a significant advantage in your dealings with publishers?
I think it's helpful, both in terms of explaining to authors how it works, and that relaxed relationship with publishers. I think it's really stupid to have an adversarial relationship with publishers as an agent, because again, we're trying to do the same thing. So I will say to an editor, "Right, what can I do to help you?" In the same way that I'll say to an author, "This is what I can do to help you, and let's talk about what you need." So if I can help both sides of that and square the circle, I think that's a very good thing. Deal with it like grown-ups, basically.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to put, we have a friend with us today. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, or whatever time it is. Yes. So if someone was a new author that was trying to think of, how should I go about this? How should I find a literary agent? How should I approach a publishing house? Do you have any advice for someone in that particular situation? What you think would be step one? Where should they begin?
Yeah. Well, if you're thinking about looking for an agent, you could think about authors who are in the same general area as you from the last 5 to 10 years. Look at their website, because the agent's name will usually mention this, so you know that agent deals with that area. And then go to their website, go to the agent's website, and do what it says in terms of submissions. Some agents want 3 chapters, some agents want 6 chapters, some agents want a synopsis, some agents don't. Do what each individual agent wants, because if you do that, you've already hit the first barrier. If you don't do that, you've tripped over the first barrier, because you're not acting professionally. And if you want us to act professionally with, then you as an author have to act professionally with us as an agent or a publisher.
That makes complete sense. Absolutely.
There are also writers' forums. There's one called SFF Chronicles, and you can Google them, SF Writers Chronicles, SF Writers websites, and you'll find, and they discuss everything. So agents are one of the things they will discuss. So, who do you think is good? Who do you think is bad? How should I look out for agents? So research, as in almost everything related to publishing, research is really useful. Don't jump in as if you know everything, because as a new writer, you won't know everything. And research in the same way as when you're researching a book, researching how to get an agent or a publisher is really useful. And again, it's acting professionally.
Fascinating. I have a question, John. What do you find is the more challenging aspect of being an agent? Is it the front end, shall we say, part of finding the right authors that fit with you, that you fit with, the whole aspect of when you actually accept an author on, depending on their work, trying to find a publisher that fits with them, or is it once you've essentially acquired a client, the you have a book deal, is it the more complicated aspects like negotiating international rights or things like that? What do you find is the most difficult section of being an agent?
Well, it will depend on the individual author. And in some cases, you will take on an author, you will edit the book, and in some cases, you will send it out to 2 or 3 people, in some cases to maybe 10, depending on what the book is, and then receive it after discussion with the author. Because I was on the other side of that table on a negotiation, we can talk sensibly about that. I have boilerplate contracts with most of the publishers in London and New York. All the percentages are already there, so that we don't need to worry about. It's the level of the advance, and then we'll talk about what else they want to do. I'm actually dealing with various self-published authors at the moment, where I'm selling their rights across the world in translation markets, and that's interesting because I have sub-agents across the world. So I will talk to, say, Ryan Cahill or Bengali or Rob Hayes about the individual rights and again deal with each of them as they want to be dealt with, not in one size. So yeah, it really is how long is a piece of string for each author. But the thing is, I enjoy this. Now, not every day is perfect. No matter what job you do, there are going to be bad days. That's a given. But basically, sometimes you just step away for an hour and think about it. Don't deal with something immediately. If you think, I don't want to get angry about this, I don't want to bang back or straight that way, go away for an hour. Let it marinate in your head. So again, in some ways, it's like acting as a grown-up instead of in a schoolyard.
I'd say that's a good skill for pretty much anyone to have. pretty blanket.
I think you're absolutely right.
Skill. And something that stuck out from what you just mentioned there is you mentioned some self-published authors, and Ryan Cahill, is a friend of the channel. He's a wonderful person. Yeah. And some of the others you mentioned as well. So I'm curious, as an agent, when you decide to take on a self-published author in order to disseminate, their works across the world, or whether they're looking to make the leap into traditional publishing, is it a different process for you as an agent when you're deciding to take on a self-published author, or instead of someone who's looking to be traditionally published or already is?
The first thing is the pros still. If they're hugely successful, but they're not making me go, wow, I'm not the right agent. With Ryan, with Ben, with Rob, reading their work, I just thought, oh yeah, I really love this. Because obviously they all came to me. I did not go to them and say, would you like an agent? So we have that conversation after, and I would always say, yes, that book, and then I'll read that as quickly as possible. Then you and I will discuss. So it is that. Once you've done that, yes, it depends if they want purely and simply subsidiary rights, if they want to talk about the possibility of some of their work being in traditional publishing and some staying in self-publishing, or if they want to move into traditional publishing. So again, one size does not fit all.
Right.
Yeah. How is, John, you've been in the industry for decades now, and you've seen all these momentous changes. In the past, representing a self-published author wouldn't have been part of your job because they simply.
No, I think it's fair to say that 15 years ago, I would not have recommended somebody to be self-published in terms of wanting to sell well. Now it's absolutely as viable as being traditionally published. Make your mind up. Do you want to be self-published, or do you want to be traditionally published? Because probably half a dozen times a month, I will get something, a submission from somebody saying, oh, I published this on Amazon last October, and now I'd like to go traditionally published. Well, I'm sorry, nobody is going to be interested because it's not a new book. It's already out there. So if you sold 100,000 copies in 6 months, yes, you'd be interested. But if you put it out there to test the waters, as some people do, it really isn't going to work. So make your mind up: traditional publishing or self-publishing.
And how difficult it is. We actually we're going to be blessed to have in a future episode coming up soon, Evan Winter, who of course started off as a self-published author, had that meteoric rise as you indicate, and then of course transitioned to being traditionally published, and now is quite a well-known traditionally published author. How do you assist an author like that with making that kind of transition? Because it sounds very complicated. You know, we've heard of those authors like the Jonathan Frenches, the Evan Winters, who, you know, you have this already established book out there, then that's pulled and then oftentimes redistributed by the big five house. Like, so how complicated? How does all that work?
Well, basically, it depends. If the author wants to stay self-published, then obviously you don't have that problem. If they are interested, and you might have a publisher come to you and say, I know you represent X for translation rights. Are they interested in being traditionally published? Because we love their work. We know they've sold very well. We think we can do something with it. So you'll have that conversation about, okay, what can you do to add value to something that's already out there and already selling well? Because it's simply, oh my God, it's traditional publishing. Yes, of course, that's a good idea. It isn't always a good idea if you're doing really well as a self-published author. So again, it's that individual conversation. I think some people really do think that publishing runs on rails, but it doesn't. It really is about changing your mind sometimes and saying, you know, I thought about that, I've slept on it, I actually think this. But yes, so you will have that conversation with the publisher as well as with the author. You may start with the author saying, okay, them saying, I want to write something new to be traditionally published. Fine. Talk to traditional publishers about the author overall and say, you know, we're thinking about this. Oh, by the way, would you be interested in any of this selling really, really well out there? So you can go back to the author and tell them that. So again, many ways through the forest.
That actually brings me to a big question that I had, which, knowing how long you've been in the game, you've seen publishing not only change from the viability of self-publishing in recent years, you've also seen a shift in formats. Because when you first started with your initial imprints, I believe your initial imprint was McDonald Futura and Orbit.
Futura, which is
Orbit.
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 That was
Orbit,
then Futura. And the owner died and it became Little Brown. So yes, Orbit going back to 1988.
Right. Okay. So at that time when you were with Orbit, I assumed that ebooks were not the juggernaut that they are today, right?
There was literally no such thing as an ebook.
Right. And audiobooks as well. So there are, you know, people like PL and I, if you can't tell from our bookshelves, we love ourselves a physical book. All right. It's a problem. But but there are so many other ways to access stories now. And there's a lot of positives to that. But being on the reader side of it, it's basically a net positive because there's so many ways for us to access the stories we want. But I assume in publishing or as an agent, it really changes the way the wheels turn and the way it works. So are there any main points that you can kind of pinpoint, oh, this was a major shift?
Right. So after Orbit, I went to Random House and I ran the imprint there. And before I left, the CEO told every editor, we have to have ebook rights in our contracts. If the agent won't allow us ebook rights, we can't do a deal. That is now true of audiobook contract with a major publisher. So those are two major changes. Obviously, in the UK, the netbook agreement meant that you had to sell at cover price. In the mid-90s, that was cancelled, which is where all the books coming out of $2.99 came from. And that's changed things a lot. In the 1980s and 90s, the major book chains would take 3 months stock of a new book. Now, if you're lucky, they take 3 weeks stock. I'm aware of Waterstones, which has 300 odd stores, taking fewer than 50 paperbacks of a new book for the national sale, which means you don't get as big a first print run, which in publishing terms mean you don't get the economy of scales on the unit cost. And that means that the book isn't out there as widely as it would have been 25 years ago. So you don't get product recognition so easily, because the most important thing still is word of mouth. You can do all the marketing you like, but if people don't tell each other, this is a great book, you should buy it, it ain't going to work. So those are major changes. Amazon is obviously a major change. But yes, the way you access a book now is so different. Probably 80% of the books I buy now are for my Kindle, because I have so many books related to my 35 years working in publishing. I don't really have space for them anymore. So I love the Kindle. I use the Kindle every day. I'm flying off to the States on holiday next week. I shall have the Kindle on the plane, and I'll read that. But yeah, so it is a completely different business, which is great because everything has to evolve.
Wow, that's incredible. And John, you've been in your long and very celebrated career, you've been around some of the biggest names associated with, in the orbit of, part of the pun, orbit, in the orbit of some of the biggest names, not only fantasy, but the Ian Banks, in the mystery, thriller milieu.
Ian was a friend for 2 years before I got into publishing through SF conventions. I met him at his first SF convention in February 1986, and he was laying on the floor with a pint of beer on his chest while his girlfriend was being chatted up by his then publisher. And I leaned over and said, "Didn't you used to be Ian Banks?" And he looked at me, opened one eye and said, "I think so." And half an hour later, we were friends. And 2 years later, I was able to say, "I am now your paperback science fiction publisher." And he said, "Good Lord," or something similar to that. So Ian and Robert Jordan, I was lucky enough to be the acquiring editor for the first 3 Robert Jordan novels at Orbit. And we got on like house on fire. It's a people business. But when I went to Random House, I already knew several of their authors through SF conventions. Greg Bear, David Gemmell, Tad Williams. So there wasn't this black hole called John Jarrold. There was somebody they knew already. And again, that's the huge pleasure of SF and fantasy, that you can go to conventions, meet your heroes, touch base with people.
Wow, that's incredible. So I guess my question is, with all your exposure to all of these brilliant literary minds, and you have had all these clients in your stable over the years, you've seen some of their careers, completely take off in very unexpected directions. And obviously there's varying levels of commercial success, but
Absolutely.
you have in your stable all these brilliant authors. You have the Matthew Wards, you have the self-published cadre you mentioned, the Tim Hardys, the Ben Galleys, the Rob Hayes, etc. So do you usually have some kind of an inkling? I know obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but do you usually have some kind of inkling of where this particular author is going, versus that this author is really going to be someone that's going to completely, explode?
I'm delighted to say you can tell. You can't second guess the public, which is a great and good thing. It's rotten if you're on the wrong side of that equation, but it is a good thing because we're not dealing with a can of baked beans. If you've got 5 fantasy authors, they're all writing very differently. You mentioned Matthew Ward. So at the moment, Matthew and Gareth Hanrahan are both published by Orbit. Very different authors, both wonderful. I've always hated the thought that I should only like this or that. There's plenty of stuff I don't like, but I've always had very wide tastes. I mean, thanks to my mother and father, who were great readers. When I was sort of 5 and 6, they sent me to the library, and I've always read voraciously in all areas. I worked in public libraries for 15 years before I got into publishing. So I've worked with books since September 1972. And this Easter, the National British SF Convention, that's the 50th anniversary of my first convention, which is a bit of a shock when you actually say it. And the guest of honor there was Samuel R. Delaney, who was living in London at the time. And Chip Delaney was a joy to have as a guest of honor at a convention. And at that point, and still one of my favorite authors, he and Roger Zelazny were sort of the new kids on the block when I started reading SF in a big way, about 1967. Sorry, I'm wambling on about stuff.
No, that's what we're here for. That's exactly what we're here for. So when you say it's a people business, right, you have to establish trust with someone, right, in order to be able to engage them on that personal level. Because what I'm hearing kind of repeated often here is that it's not cookie cutter. Nothing about this is cookie cutter. So
No.
if you have that pre-established trust, if you're a people person with someone, you're more likely to have a successful partnership with that client.
I think so. I think you've got to be able to talk honestly.
Right.
It's no good walking around the park. If something is wrong, you've got to say so. And whether that's the author, the agent, or the publisher. And then you deal with it as adults. And you say, okay, look, if we did that instead of this, would that work? And again, sometimes you're the middleman there, and you try and work out something that will work both for the publisher and for the author.
Right. And as someone who's widely read, as you mentioned, you do have a broad taste, but there's always something that's not going to match someone, right? There's always going to be a book that's not for someone. So in that
publisher,
please.
No, I was just going to say, as a publisher, I took on lots of books that other publishers whose taste I admired had turned down. They all did the same with books I turned down. So it's absolutely that personal taste. It isn't purely and simply, I think this will work commercially. It's, do I love it 100% head and heart? Without that, you say no. And I will say, I'm not the right, I think you may well be published sometimes, but I'm not the right agent because you're not making me go, wow. So if you want me to, I'll suggest some other agents you could go to. Because when a new author is published, it's good for all of us. It's good for publishing, it's good for the genre. And everything feeds into everything else. And no, I do not think for a second I'm the right agent for everybody. Nobody's the right agent for everybody. Nobody's the right publisher for everybody. And no author is the right person for that agent or that publisher. It's about the individual thing again.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think
that does me. Yes, no, I agree 100%. I love the fact that it's an individual case by case thing, but that does bring up a worry that a lot of people, I think, have with the consolidation of or the perceived consolidation of publishing. Amazon is just one Goliath in that discussion. But, you know, the fact that we're down to the big 5 publishing houses, and I think there was a discussion of a merger between 2 of them not long ago. So as people viewing it from the outside, it looks a little scary. So for someone who knows the reality, how do you see that? Yeah.
Well, you think when we were offering for the first Game of Thrones trilogy, which I think was Christmas 1994, it was the last time that every SF and fantasy editor in London offered for the same book. There were 11 of us. Now there are fewer imprints. There are more editors because the big imprints have 2, 3, 4 editors, where at the time there was only 1 at each of the imprints. And it's entirely understandable. Also, some of the people who were then publishing SF and fantasy are now being told by their sales and marketing directors that they can only take on stuff if they believe it will get as well as the genre market. So crossover is a word I hear used far more often than almost anything else in the last year, 18 months. So that means that 3 imprints who 5 years ago I would have sent mainstream SF and fantasy to don't want to see it anymore. That's more so in the UK than in the US. Obviously, with Penguin Random House, you've still got a number of imprints in there, but Bantam and Del Rey have been folded in together. Ace and Rock have been folded in together. So again, if one person turns it down on one of those imprints, that's 2 imprints out of the way, straight away. Over here, that hasn't happened yet. And we have got Random House now with a Del Rey imprint and Hodder more interested, but again, they want stuff that you believe and they believe they can sell outside the genre's core market. So that's another change that I've seen in the last 2 years. And yes, it is difficult. It never was easy, but yes, with the corporatization of publishing, there are too many cold hands of corporate publishing leaning on people all the time.
And this is I personally
I'm sorry, I can't be more positive there.
We're here to ask you for the answers. Thanks for providing them.
Yeah, and I personally find this very fascinating. I've been very unexpert, new to the game, but very much been watching this as an outsider, as a writer, and as a blogger. So with interest in and just general interest. But so John, where is this all going? Because for me as an outsider, even though I'm an author, self-published author, I see the pervasiveness of Amazon and what they're doing. They're selling, actually the vast preponderance of the world's books now, right? They're distributing them. You have traditional publishing that seems to be contracting. You have still, if you're an ex-president, a movie star, a celebrity, for Prince Harry's book Spare, this, millions of dollars in terms of an advance, right? But then you hear on the other side of zero advances in some sectors of especially more the hybrid publishing. Like where do you're someone who we look to as an expert in terms of trends. Where is this going in terms of publishing? Is self-publishing going to become more of a thing? Is traditional publishing going to maintain its foothold in terms of I guess the preferred method of like where is this all going, do you think?
I think self-publishing certainly will be stronger as long as people understand they have to treat it as a business. It isn't just a matter of saying I will throw my book out on Amazon and people will buy it. No, they won't. You'll sell fewer than 100 copies if you do that. Most of the self-published authors I know who have worked really hard and worked well probably don't spend more than 50% of time writing. 50% of the time is spent promoting, getting covers right, getting the book edited, getting the book copy edited, getting the book. So all of the things that the publisher has to do. If you're going to be a successful self-published author, that's what you have to do. And you have to take that on. I think that some imprints are moving faster than others. Some publishers are moving faster than others in terms of the changes. And you need to be fast on your feet because things are changing very, very quickly now. You need to see how things are changing. In some cases, sales directors hate ebooks because they can't decide how many they'll print. Every sales director I've ever worked with, and I love them dearly, they want to be in charge. Now, they will tell you if you're going to print 1,000 hardbacks or 10,000 backs. They can't do that with ebooks, and they're scared of ebooks. Ebooks should be much bigger, I think, in mainstream publishing than they are. I think that you almost need somebody in the sales department who's only dealing with ebooks and getting behind them in a much bigger way. Same with audio you're seeing now. So I think you may see that some imprints, some editors will be collapsed into each other so that the person who is fast on their feet is the person they're relying on to do that. As a publisher, as an editor, you used to be in charge of the imprint. A lot of editors now have to report almost to their sales and marketing directors who will tell them what areas they can buy. Whereas, for instance, when I took on Ken McLeod's first novel, The Star Fraction, at Random House, it arrived, I read it overnight, stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning to finish it, as that cliche. I went into the publishing director's office the next morning and said, right, we're going to do this. I'm going to do a 2-book deal. I want £20,000 mark, and otherwise I'm not making an offer. There is no way you could do that now. It's entirely a marketing-led business. I know one of the senior editors at Penguin in London, somebody who was once slated to be the head of Penguin, who got something from an agent and author he'd known for years and said, okay, 10 years ago, I'd have told you, I'm taking this into a meeting on Tuesday, and when I come out of the meeting, I'll make you an offer of roughly that. All I can tell you now is I'm taking it into the meeting, and when the sales director tells me what to think, I'll tell you what I can offer. And that's one of the biggest, most important editors in London. So that's one of the problems you've got. The sales and marketing run publishing. And they tend, not always, but they tend to be backward looking. Let's do what worked last year because that worked. Whereas as an editor, you have to be forward looking. And yes, of course, you want to publish in the areas that are working in general terms, but you want to be looking for that different thing. And looking for your thumbs. You can't go into a meeting and say, I know this will work because, or you can say, and I think that's a problem now in some corporate publishing.
Yeah, I think something that really sticks out for me in that wanting to find something different, or it's good to find something different, is the phenomenon that is Legends and Lattes with Travis Baldree, right? So grimdark and big epic fantasy, that was like the thing for many years, and it still is a huge juggernaut, don't get me wrong. But Legends and Lattes took off And it was because
Yes.
it was something new people were looking for. So I think
Yep.
you make a very good point about forward looking versus backward looking. I think that's a really
Yep.
key
Yep.
issue here.
I mean, there has to be a balance, because a number of publishers, when I'm dealing with younger editors now, they don't want to see classic epic fantasy. But I know there's a huge market for epic fantasy. And that's one of the areas that self-publishing is coming in. 25 years ago, the head buyer at W.H. Smith told me, in sales terms, we no longer see a humorous fantasy market. We see a Terry Pratchett market. So all the authors we were publishing then, their sales went down. They fell off a cliff, basically, between 1992 and 1997. So we didn't take any more on. We all had one or two before that. There is a market for that in self-publishing. It's the people who are going to deal with this, who will say, okay, look, this is an area that we need to get into, that I believe can work really well in traditional publishing, in the self-publishing area. It's not having that mindset that says, oh, that's yesterday. Equally, having that mindset saying, oh, we tried that 8 years ago, it didn't work. It's 2023. It's not 2015. It's not 2000. It's not 1988 when I got into publishing. Thank God, it's a completely different world. And that's the joy of it. But you have to move fast to see that. You can't do what you did 5-10 years ago.
So in all that, and obviously, John, you're again a celebrated, traditionally published agent. You have self-published clients who may or may not be aspiring to become traditionally published. You have traditionally published clients who are exclusively looking to maintain being traditionally published. I've talked to a lot of my friends in the field, authors, both traditionally self-published, agents, editors, etc. And I think the consensus among most of us is that there's nothing wrong with aspiring to get an agent. That in itself is difficult. And if you get an agent, obviously your hard work, but you've also kind of won the lottery. Then once an agent actually manages to sell your work and you get a book deal, I believe Philip Chase, who actually is about to be self-published himself, the wonderful Philip Chase, shout out to him. Then once your agent, you get that book deal, and now if you manage to sell and subsequently sell well and get another book deal in the future, you've really you've really hit that sweet spot. But it would seem that the consensus amongst a lot of my friends and colleagues in industry is that you have a better chance of being successfully self-published in some ways than you do of acquiring an agent, getting a book deal, and continuing to be successful as a traditionally published author, because apparently the numbers say that the vast preponderance of traditional authors don't necessarily earn out their advances, don't necessarily get subsequent book deals, etc. What's your opinion on all that? What would if you were a new author breaking into the field today? Do you focus on would you recommend, because we know you're not biased, we know you're going to give us some of the best information possible. Focus on self-publishing, focus on trying to get an agent and a book deal. What?
Well, I will use that phrase I use so often in my Twitter Q&As, no absolutes. You have to consider both, I think, and then make a considered decision on that. It's also true that 30 years ago, 70% of published books did not earn out. That is not a new thing. Sometimes you will see a higher deal for the next 2-3 books, whatever. Sometimes you'll see a lower deal. Sometimes you won't see a deal. So again, you have to look at, and we all know authors who have moved to another company. We know authors who have decided to go self-published after they've been traditionally published. So I think the thing is, honestly, think about it. Don't assume that trad publishing is the best way. Don't assume that self-publishing is the best way. Think about what you want, what you're willing to do, because some authors have said to me, I know self-publishing is a good thing, but I'm just not willing to put all that time in apart from writing. Well, in that case, they're not right for self-publishing. So again, it's up to the individual. And I apologize for sort of keep on sounding like a parrot repeating that, but it is true that you really need to consider what's right for you as an individual. Yes, you can. You can be an Ian Banks, you can be a Robert Jordan, where the sales go up and up. With the majority of authors, that does not happen. It didn't happen 30 years ago. It doesn't happen now. As the publisher spending on marketing tells the people it's there, that's all they can do. After that, it is about public taste. It is about word of mouth. And that's the same as it would be in any creative art, that some people will like Picasso and some people will like J.W. Turner. It's absolutely about personal taste, which is the thing that horrifies publishers, authors, and agents when they see a one-star review on Amazon that conflates, I don't like this book, with this book is bad, because one is subjective and one is objective. And just because you don't like it doesn't mean somebody else will. I can't understand why this has got so many 5-star reviews, but because those people like it. That's why it's got so many 5-star reviews. You don't like it, that's fine. Nothing's right for everybody, which again is a great pleasure. We don't want everything to be right for everybody. We don't want lowest common denominator. We want highest common factor. One of the problems with sales and marketing in publishing now is they are looking for lowest common denominator. They are looking for, yes, we can sell this to the biggest possible audience, i.e. outside the genre. And if you can't do that, we won't publish it. We won't allow you to take it on. That, I think, is a problem.
And you've mentioned also a couple times so far the idea of word of mouth, and yes, publishers can get and agents can get the book out there, but after that, it's public opinion. And something that has also changed, not just ebooks, but is the interwebs, the internet, the thing that we're all on right now, right? BookTube, Book Talk. And even if you want to throw in their Kickstarter, I mean, Brandon Sanderson was able to set new records by utilizing a different way to publish a book. So I guess it's kind of a broad question, but do you see it as a net positive? Because the internet does allow for people to go on 1-star screeds, but it also allows for people to say, this book is phenomenal, everyone read it.
Yeah, I think it can be a positive. I think absolutely. And again, I've got authors, not just my clients, but people I've known at conventions for years, who said, I'm not that keen on social media. And I said, well, look, I would speak to your publisher about that, because most publishers now have people to go through with an author how social media works and how it works with them, again, as an individual. Because some people are natural at doing that and some people aren't. But for the people who aren't, sometimes there's a way of saying, well, if you spend 5 minutes a day doing this, it's going to make a major difference, or it gives you the chance of making a major difference. And 5 minutes a day is nothing. You can do that. I go on social media. I go on Twitter and Facebook regularly, retweet stuff from my clients, mention this, and I love that. I mean, I'm gregarious. I'm naturally gregarious. I like going out there. This is why I started going to conventions when I was 19. Ended up sitting out at a bar all night with Brian Wallace and James Blish, two of my absolute heroes, at my first convention. Now, how the hell would that happen? I don't know, but it did. So you have to take that into consideration, because some people are naturally not like that. But because you're on social media, it's not immediate. You can do that and then you can run away. You can mention your book. You can show the cover. You can do a couple of paragraphs about how the idea came to you. Anything like that. It's a hook which you can use. So again, find the way it works for you. That can make it a total positive. You're absolutely right. You've also got the trolls who are basically, anytime somebody who they, for whatever reason they don't like, goes on there, they will put a bad thing. So block them. Don't worry about it. Just block them, because they're not worth it. They really are not. They're the scum of the earth. And the more we block them, the better it is. So basically, that's it. Social media, I think, it is a positive. It has negative connotations too.
Yeah, and I think on that vein, John, I'm not sure if you're seeing this. So in speaking to my my traditionally published friends and the few people that I know that are actually working for Big Five imprints, that depending on the organization, it's again not one size fits all. It varies from publisher to publisher and from imprint to imprint and author to author. Some authors, I believe, are finding that there's a bit more, I won't say pressure. There's a bit more encouragement to be more active in engaging with marketing, with social media, with, some agents and publishers, they don't care if you never have a social media account. As you said, they're going to do their part to help let people know the books are out there, and you go from there. Some publishers and agents are a lot more engaged and a bit more assertive in terms of recommending that, hey, as an author, you need to get out there, you need to promote your works, you need to go to this convention, you need to go on this booktube interview, etc. So do you find that is happening, that there is more of a trend towards, in the traditional publishing world, to have authors do more, to be more participative in terms of their participation in social media?
Yeah, the marketing and promotion. Absolutely. I think one of the things that the social media has done, and again, most of the big five publishers now have people specifically dealing with social media, is they've said, look, this is something that we would have loved you to do 30 years ago if it had been there. It wasn't. Now it is. Let's use it every way we can. So yes, I think, and I will say to my clients, which areas of social media are you in? Which areas of social media you want to be in? And we can work out what's good for you. And then I will share or retweet or whatever what you put on there. So we get product recognition, which is a major thing, which again leads back to word of mouth.
Yeah, and that's something that I think, when you talk about trends and things that I'm seeing as a self-published author, and having friends on both sides, but both, in and everything in between, because again, hybrid publishing is definitely, something that's becoming quite popular. In that, along that, now you yourself had mentioned that there's so many, I call them writer associate activities. So much of your time is spent not as much writing anymore. I know for me, I find that writing takes up 30 to 40% of all the time, involving what I do as an author, and the other part is all social media stuff, or certainly an offshoot of that. Yeah. But does that change? Is that affecting authors' ability to produce, to be prolific, to write? I always say, body of work is what will really get you where you need to go as an author. The more books you write, the more you produce, but you still have to market those books. You can't just write them and leave them in the corner. Like
a book a year is still fine, but obviously some people will have a job as well as writing. It'll depend. I mean, I think the best thing to do is to structure your day or structure your week, and say, I will do social media from 9:30 to 10 and from 6 to 6:30, or whatever it suits you. Because again, it's the same as writing. Does it suit you to sit by the window? Does it suit you to sit away from the window? Does it suit you to write in the morning, evening, whatever? Find out, try them all and see what works. So the same with social media. See what works for you, because you will suddenly think, yeah, this works. If you're doing it at 9:30 instead of middays, something as simple as that. It can just be, I'm totally relaxed. I'm totally focused. For the next half hour, I'm going to do this. Then I'm going away until this evening. The one thing I would say is it's pointless saying, I wish it was like it was 30 years ago, because it isn't. And it's no good saying, all I want to do is write. Well, fine. Self-publish, but then if you're only going to do is write, you're not going to sell, because you'll sell 100 copies. It isn't 30 years ago. Nothing's the same way it was 30 years ago. We talked about ebooks, we talked about audio. The first day I worked in publishing, we just got our first fax machine. Now that was 1988. Before that, it was telex or a phone call to New York or whatever, So everything changes. And you've got to deal with the way things are in 2023. The way you certainly, but in 2023, not the way it would have suited you in 1988 or 1995. This is it. It's not a rehearsal.
On that similar vein is, not only do you have to market the products that you have and your work, but you also have to, in a way, market yourself and kind of make yourself a brand. And I can see a lot of positives and negatives to that. As someone who, by my own volition, started a booktube channel, I sat in front of a camera and accepted the fact I am this brand. This is what I'm building this around. Yeah. And personality is a part of that. But I have heard some authors express that they want their books to be the forefront, not necessarily themselves as the brand. And that can also become mixed up if someone steps on a landmine online, or, you know, whatever could happen to the person. I think that there's also a line to walk there. And I wonder if you have authors ask you for help on towing that line, how to do that correctly.
I do. I also go back to them and say what I said earlier, that most publishers now have somebody working specifically with social media. So they will say to the author, okay, look, come into the office for a day, or let's call for an hour, and we'll go through how it works, the stuff that you don't want to do, the stuff that you shouldn't do, and the stuff you should do that will make you feel relaxed. So it's, at that point, it's not a brand. It's just about being a presence on the internet. And in general terms, a presence on the internet is fine. You know, if you don't want to be a brand, but you can put yourself out there and say, you have a new book's out next month, great cover, boom, 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 boom. You'll find that once you get more and more followers, they will retweet that. So again, that works. It's not that you have to be there every day or every hour and having a comment about everything that's going on in the world. One thing. Again, it's some authors, that's what it suits. Some authors do want to have comments 10 times a day or 15 times a day on various things. That suits them. The other way would not suit them. So you talk to each author about that, and absolutely they should go to whichever publisher they're with and say, I want to discuss how social media works, what I can do for you, but equally that I feel happy with. I'm not going to be forced into stuff. Because it's forced into stuff. So the publisher shouldn't want that.
That makes sense. I wanted to make sure I slept on this comment, but our friend William Gwynn is here. He says, great to see John. Always so interesting. William. Looking forward to listening more. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, William. Amazing.
Then we did have a question here. Yes, authors need to be looking to self-publishing. We should have agents who would help getting it done for a 15%. I'm not sure if this cut off. I'm not sure what the comment was here exactly. I was looking to see if I was reading it incorrectly, if you all understood.
Yeah, I wonder if they're talking about what an agent's fee is.
Yeah, if it's self-publishing, then the author has to take control of that. So as I said earlier, they have to think of getting the book proofread, book edited, getting a great cover, what they're going to do for promotion, because the odds are that book is not going to be in stores. So how they can get it sold, not just through Amazon, but elsewhere. And of course, ebooks and getting an audio deal. So that's where you come in sometimes as an agent. Sometimes if you do a deal for the audio rights or for the ebook rights separate to their print rights, you will get your percentage of that deal. So again, it's about what works for the individual author.
Yeah, you know, while we're on that subject, John, if you wouldn't mind, just, I don't know, we obviously can't give, again, absolutes, just in a general sense, more of an industry standard, because I believe that the question was also leading into what nominally an agent's fee is for, you know, things
15%
like...
15% is average.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, yes, cut off, my fingers are too fast or slow. That happens. That happens. And another theme that you've mentioned a couple times while we've been talking here, and also something that you brought up in the article that I was very thankful that you shared with me ahead of time. You've mentioned the idea of diversity and how that's such a joy for you to see.
Yes.
Because times are changing. And that's something that oh, yes, please, go ahead. Please.
I was going to say, if I look back at, say, 6-7 years ago at my submissions, I look at them now, far more diverse now in all ways, which is an absolute joy. It should have happened years ago. It's happening now. And it's still about the words, it's still about the prose, but it's great for me to be able to expand the areas in which I can work. It might be African mythology for a fantasy, it might be Chinese science fiction, whatever it is. The fact that it isn't all Anglo-based, it isn't either US or UK, the fact that it isn't all white, the fact that it isn't all medieval Europe in epic fantasy, that's all a great pleasure for me. As I said earlier, it shouldn't be like it was when I started running Orbits in 1988. It has to be different. There is room for everything, but the diversity adds value on all fronts.
Yeah, that's incredible. My dear friend Taylor, she's too modest to say, she did a wonderful video involving diversity, especially in fantasy. And that really brings me to a topic that, it really touches me as a racialized person and author, that, in as much as you see some of the biggest fantasy writers in the world are from the LGBTQ2A plus community, are racialized, are, you have your Temps and Muirs, and you have your Samantha Shannons and your Peter Julie Clarks and your N.K. Jemisons, and you can name them all. But yet it still seems that they occupy, as big as they are, a small space in a way in terms of the vast preponderance of the genre. So I feel we still almost we're just getting there. We're not there yet.
You use the phrase, we're getting there. That's why I say it should have started a long time ago. So we're running fast, not to stand still. We are moving forwards, but we're running fast to move forwards more slowly than we should. So it's absolutely necessary that we expand and we expand and we expand. Because, if you talk about their place, mainstream SF has been, and fantasy has been the way it has for a long time. So you've got to build on that. And in the short term, it will be a small percentage. In the medium to longer term, it will grow to a much larger percentage. It can't happen overnight. Just in commercial terms, it can't happen overnight. But it's happening faster, I think, every year. Still not fast enough, but it's happening faster every year.
Well, those authors are selling, right? They're selling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's an audience. And look, it's a commercial business. If there's an audience, you want to publish to it.
That actually flows very nicely into a question that I had, which is, as readers, some readers don't have a platform, but I am a reader that does, and PL also has one, and on Twitter and things like that. Is there any advice you could give people who want to give feedback to publishing, that we like this, that we want to see more of this? Obviously, reading the books, buying the books, that is something that I think all of us are willing to do. But is there any other way to put it out there in a way that might reach large 5 publishers, the big 5 or whatever?
Well,
this is something we love.
Social media. Personally, most imprints now have a Twitter feed and or a Facebook feed. So you can mention what you're saying on that. And if you want to get 10 of your friends and you say, we all love this book, then you should all go on that Twitter feed and say, we love this book. Because the more times it's said, the more likely it is to be taken seriously. Again, publishers are very aware of social media. So they really want to hear what people think and why they think it. Because, again, sales and marketing, if they see that coming in regularly, they're going to talk to editors about that area and say, well, why don't we get more in that area?
Yeah. And I think the one thing that really strikes me, John, about changes, we talk about changes and trends and things happening in the industry, is that I still remember, I'm old enough certainly to recall when when a major book was published, irrespective of the genre, that we all waited for that big book critic to write a review, or book critics to write a review of that book, and their review is almost like gospel about what the book was. Now we have BookTube, where certainly, and I recall most book critics in the past were generally journalists or had been journalists in a former life were associated with the journalism industry in some form or fashion. Some of them were writers themselves, etc. But they were the authority essentially on a book, whether it was good, whether it's bad. Now we have book two, with all these varying contrasting opinions, with people who, many of them have no background whatsoever in the literary world, but have a love for books and a passion, and come on and have these channels. But I mean, it's so different now.
It is again one of the major changes, and I think the point is that if you get to know somebody on the net who likes certain areas, and you realize that they like what you like, then you have a way in to think, well, if they're supporting that, and I've liked those 3 books from them, I should look at this as well. So yeah, it's a much more level playing field than it was. I mean, again, before the internet, when you were getting a magazine like Locus or Interzone or whatever, and you looked for the reviews in there, still do. I still look at Gary Wolf's reviews in Locus regularly, for instance. But it is much more open to people to explain what they like and why they like it, and to give you an idea. And I know you have that comeback in both directions as well. So again, I think that's a positive. That's a huge positive.
Yeah, because I would argue now that there's a lot of people that look, for example, to Taylor's channel to see what, her reading list, what her TBR is going to be for next month. People that look to, the Philip Chases and the Patrick Leos, and you name it, the Daniel Chases. And that's where a lot of people are consuming, what they want to read, what they potentially want to read, whether a book is good or not. They're looking now more there, certainly as much as they're looking on the recent Locus issue to see, what's hot and what's trending. So I think that's a big difference. Before, if you had a positive Kirkus review, or you were mentioned Locus, that was the mention you needed, right? Now,
it's still wonderful for the author to get a great Kirkus review. Of course it is. And then you mention that on social media, which again broadens the vibe.
Yeah, but now you can have Taylor.
As I say, it's a level playing field. It means that everybody can get their opinions out there. Obviously, you want an informed opinion of some sort, that people who know the area they're writing in. Because again, I will occasionally get a submission from somebody who says, I've never read science fiction, but obviously it's easy because you don't have to deal with the real world. And you think, well, I'm probably not going to take you on. Again, is that intelligent?
I don't know about that one.
Oh God, yes. Or dealing with fantasy. So, I'm just making it all up. So there's no background. I'm thinking, you really don't understand, do you? I always say to people who say, do you like historical fiction? Well, okay, here are 6 fantasy novels you might like. And it may be that magic gets in the way. Sometimes it does. But the sense of place and the sense of history and the sense of the characters, the setting, are wonderful in the best of fantasy today. You look at the characters in a science fiction novel like Adrian Tchaikovsky, and outstanding characters, people you care about, because it doesn't matter how good the world building is if the characters don't matter. If you don't care what happens to that person, world building means nothing whatsoever.
Yep.
Yeah. Shout out to some of those great. I'm thinking specifically some of your clients, self-published authors, Tim Hardy's, whose work I absolutely adore. World building is phenomenal. The Bengalis, the Rob Hayes,
We've been talking for a decade.
I'm currently reading the last book in The War Eternal by Rob DeHaze. It's my current physical read, and I just talk about characters. Eska, the character, she's who brings me back. I love her. Exactly. She's a horrible person, and I love her. So
that's the thing. It isn't that you have to like the person as a person, but you're fascinated and in some ways empathizing with them.
Yes.
So you can look at Mark Lawrence famously, writes characters, leading characters you wouldn't necessarily want to share a cup of tea with, but they are fascinating. You can always look at that. Some people have always said the bad guys get the best lines. The devil has the best tunes. it again, sorry, not one way through the forest. It's about, does that character work for you? Do those characters work for you, as well as the world, as well as the setting? It's a huge joy to see that. I mean, God almighty, I get up in the morning sometimes thinking, well, I'm going to read X today. At the moment, I've got 3 new books to read from clients, one I'm editing. So that is an immense joy.
I would imagine so. I mean, I'm kind of, like I said before we went live, I'm a little jealous. It's awesome that that's your job.
Also, I read quickly,
Wonderful.
which is really useful.
Yeah.
And I have done since I was 12 or so. We used to go on 2 weeks holiday when I was 14. I'd come back with 14 paperbacks in the bag. I'd read them all. So I would read a book a day. So that is really useful working in publishing.
I imagine
and not
so.
skim reading, you actually know what's happened.
Yeah.
Especially with big fantasy, which takes a while.
Yeah, there's some, I don't know if you could tell, there's some chonkers back here. So
yeah, I have, the same.
But Cahill has been talking about his latest book, and it's like yay big.
Listen, Wolf War and Ruin, you could kill someone with that book. I told when I saw the size of that paperback. Good Lord.
I can't lie. I love my chunky books. I think I have a maximum kind of range that's more comfortable for me. But again, I've been reading more and more bigger books as my reading.
Yeah, it's the first copy of Lord of the Rings I bought in 1970.
Wow!
Oh my God!
What, about 1,100 pages long? Nobody said at the time, "Oh, it's really difficult. I can't hold it up in bed because it's going to fall on my chest." Yeah. You read it. I read it in 10 days, slowing down because I did not want to finish it. I don't see this thing about, "Oh, this book is too big." Just if you're really enjoying it, damn well get on with it.
I agree.
I'm proud that I bought that from 52 years ago.
No, I agree. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Jenny Wirtz now, my favorite author. Her books certainly are thick books. All my George R. Martin Malaz and books that I've been reading recently. Getting into, thanks to Taylor, Brandon Sanderson. So I mean, those are all authors who write quite voluminous volumes. Absolutely. And I mean, but enjoying them all. But I'm curious, John. So obviously you have a lot of diverse tastes, whatever. What does John Jarrold like to read? What kind of books? What kind of fantasy books? Like what? I know you have broad taste, but what do you what's your go-to? What do you love to read?
I no longer have a go-to. Back in the day, I would have told you 2 or 3 names. I'll tell you some of the names over the last decade that I've loved reading. Lydia Corafor. I love Elliot de Boudard. Joe Abercrombie is both a mate and one of my favorite authors. I've known Joe for over 10 years. Not one of my clients, but just a really good friend. We have dinner together once a year, and he makes me laugh. I love that sort of dark humor. I love that rather than something that's 100% serious all the time. I think vary it. Use humor as well as darkness. Adrian Tchaikovsky, I love. Samantha Shannon, I love. Laini Taylor, I love. There's a great joy in sort of seeing what's out there and trying something new. Obviously, because I'm dealing with 40 authors and I'm editing their books, I don't have a lot of time to read, which is why when I'm going away, I'm taking a couple of things that aren't to do with work with me. And that will be fun. And again, I will take advice from friends whose taste I admire, because you never know everything. No matter who you are, what you are, it's a joy to see something new and to have that enthusiasm that you had when you first read Lord of the Rings, when you first read Zelazny, when you first read Brian Aldiss, when you first read Ursula Le Guin. I can remember the first time I read Left Hand of Darkness and just thinking, wow. 2 years after, I ended up sitting at a dinner table with Ursula, sitting next to her, when there was a series of lectures in London, which, I'm like 22, and we're sitting down and we're talking about life. And that's wonderful. I am blessed. I'm so damn blessed. This is a
perfect segue into the last question that I always like to ask our guests, because I know that we're coming up on, an hour and a half and we don't want to take too much of your time. But whenever we have someone on page 2ing, though, I like to finish with a little bit more of a personal question for the guest, which is, I'm obsessed with origin stories, mythologies, things like that in the books that I read. And that also makes me interested in those types of things in the people that I meet. And you have mentioned thus far in the interview that Lord of the Rings was quintessential to you, and Ursula K. Le Guin you just mentioned. But I always like to ask if there's a story that you recall that made you into the not necessarily book lover, but the story lover that you are today. Be it a book, a movie, whatever it was that stuck out to you in your life that you think has been a cornerstone in making you the kind of reader that you are today.
Okay, well, but I will always mention Lord of the Rings, but going back to when I started reading SF and fantasy, and I read widely in all areas, and I still do. I can remember reading Babel 17 and Nova by Chip Delaney, and I still recommend both of those to authors who want to write space-based science fiction, because I believe they're still two of the best SF novels ever written, with really interesting protagonists. I think it's 65, 67 they were first published. I think Babel 17 won the first Nebula Award in 65. It tied with Dune for the best SF novel of the year in the first Nebula Awards. Nova is quite remarkable. I remember first reading Roger Zelazny, This Immortal, The Dream Master. One much darker than the other. And again, Zelazny is best as a novelist. Could do anything. And then later on, the short stories took over to a larger extent, I think, for his best writing. Other people won't agree with me. Brian Aldiss was so varied. Mike Moorcock. I first read Mike Moorcock probably about 1969 in paperbacks that cost very little, let's say. I was delighted to publish Mike with new Elric novels about 20 years ago. And we're friends on Facebook, and we chat a lot. All of those things feed in. Apart from Lord of the Rings, I don't think there's one thing. Always loved films. Again, both my parents adored films, so I used to go to the cinema a lot as a kid, and watch films on wet Sunday afternoons on TV. And you're absolutely right. It's about storytelling. It's about the story and the characters. After that, it's about the setting. Because if you don't care about the story and characters, setting doesn't matter. If you do, then it does matter a lot. And yeah, I can remember having lunch with the filmmaker Ken Russell. He rang me one day when I was at Random House. I said, hello. And he said, this is Ken Russell. I said, oh, hello, Ken. He said, I'm writing a science fiction novel. I was told you're the person I should talk to. So I said, what you always say in that situation. I said, can I take you out for lunch, Ken? And we had lunch, and he was frowning as we walked into the restaurant. We had a lovely meal. We talked about his novel for an hour, then we talked about films for 2 hours. I'm sitting in a restaurant with drinking good red wine with Ken Russell, talking about films. This is not too bad. As we walk out, I say, why were you frowning when we walked in? He said, oh, I knew this place. This is where I bought Twiggy and Justin de Villeneuve on the opening night of The Boyfriend in 19, whatever it was. And we killed ourselves in laughter. I did not publish the novel eventually, but we stayed friends until he died. We kept in touch on a regular basis. So it's about storytelling. It's about the people who can tell you a story. We both love Powell and Pressburger. So things like I Know Where I'm Going, things like just the wonderful filmmakers. And I love Hitchcock. I love Cary Grant. And Michael Caine and Sean Connery were the two British actors I grew up with. So it took me years to do a Sean Connery accent. Michael Caine was a lot easier because I come from South London. Yeah, I remember going to see The Untouchables with Ian Banks. And we both come out of there doing Sean Connery accents. Capone, you want to get Capone? I'll tell you how you get Capone. He pulls your knife, you pull a gun. He puts one of yours in the hospital. You put one of his in the morgue. That's the Chicago incident. That's how you get Capone. And we just kill ourselves with laughter. Yeah, it's about.
I love that movie. I love that movie.
How do you think he feels now? Better or worse? Great film. Sorry about that.
Yes, No, I love it. Stories are so quintessential to who we are as just a species. So I find that I always enjoy asking this question because you can see the joy come out of the person who's sharing what means a lot to them. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
We also just had Derek who said, "Oh man, I missed most of the show. I'll have to watch the replay." Please do.
Replay work.
Please do, and drop a comment. We also have Cal saying, "Thanks for a great informative stream. Enjoyable too." And a laugh. Sean, I meant John. Before we sign off, I would just like to give you a chance to tell people if they missed the beginning of the stream or they're watching the replay and want to know how they can contact you or where they can go to see your client list. Where can they look for you out there in the world? Where can they find you?
Well, on the internet, www.johnjarrold.co.uk. On the homepage, if you want to submit, you'll see the submission guidelines, and all the information background is there. And if you don't want to submit to me, that's absolutely fine, because as I said earlier, nobody is right for everybody. So good luck to everyone who's writing, because it's a damn difficult job, and you all deserve a cup of tea or possibly a glass of wine.
And what about you, PL? Where can they find you, my wonderful co-host?
Besides you, my wonderful co-host, and besides Steve, for the most part, on Page Chewing, our author interview and creative celebrity, I guess, interview feature where we get to talk to wonderful people like John. A lot of big things planned for Page Chewing 2023, so please tune in. You can also find me. I am an assistant editor with Before We Go blog, the amazing blog site led by the incredible Beth Tabler, where Taylor is also an assistant editor and Steve's a blogger. So you can find my reviews there often and on Goodreads. And of course, we're in the middle of the self-published fantasy blog off a final round. So exciting times with the finalists about to be chosen from 10 amazing books, all 300 books. Incredible, but we're down to the final 10. So watch out for those reviews coming. For the books, my website, www.plstore.com. That's where you can find out about the Drowned Kingdom saga. 2 books out right now, The Last of the Atlanteans and the Drowned Kingdom. And the 3rd book, Lord and King, is coming very soon. I'm excited about that. It'll be dropping in the next few months. My preferred social media handle, I'm a Twitter. Let's face it, the best place to find me is on Twitter. I am on Instagram and Facebook, but far more infrequently. Twitter, it's at PL Stuart Writes. So you want to talk about books, you want to find out things about Page Chewing or my series, that the best place to get a hold of me is there. So, and I want to quickly say, John, thank you so much for coming on. You're so wonderful. So thank you.
It is an absolute pleasure. As you may have worked out, I quite like talking about publishing. So yeah, it's a real pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. It's much appreciated.
Of course. And Bree just said, hey, Bree, we just finished. So thanks for joining, but hopefully you can watch the replay. There's some real good tidbits in here. If you are watching this stream and somehow do not know who I am, my name is Taylor. My BookTube channel is Made Between the Pages. You can find me on Twitter. Those links are always in the description down below. But the best place to find me is on this channel, on the Page Chewing episodes, just like this one. You can also, in the description down below, find John's links to his Twitter and his website as well. So you can go directly there. Run, don't walk, if you're interested in his services.
Can I just say,
there's a
I do a monthly Twitter Q&A. And if anyone's interested, I try to explain very basic things. And I always feel it helps all newer writers, not just the person who's asking the question. So you don't have to ask a question. You can just sit there and watch it. And I do that every month. I did it earlier this week, and the next one is towards the end of March. And again, that's a joy because it makes me think about what I do and why I do it.
And that's a great resource for anyone who just wants to ask a question to someone who's clearly very knowledgeable about publishing. So definitely go. So the Twitter will also be linked down below. John's Twitter will also be linked down below for anyone watching. Of course. Yeah, well, thank you everyone for coming by in the chat and for joining us, and anyone watching the replay. We appreciate you always coming to engage with page chewing. And for the final time, it was lovely to have you, John.
Thank you both. An absolute joy.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Take care.